Hi everyone! Today's video is going to be all about what denominators really represent. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, I already know what denominators represent. I already know that a denominator tells me how many equal-sized pieces make up one whole. And that is absolutely true. Denominators do tell us how many equal-sized pieces it takes to make up one whole. But did you also know that they're really the unit we're working with? It's true. So if I was working with a measurement problem, I might be talking about inches or feet or miles. All of those units would be given to me as a word, and it would be pretty easy for me to tell that they were a unit. Something that a lot of fifth graders don't know is that the denominator of a fraction is also the unit we're working with. So if I'm talking about thirds, that denominator of 3 tells me that my unit is a 1/3 sized piece. So let's take a look at this a little bit more closely because understanding this idea can be really helpful when you're solving fraction word problems. So let's take it a step back for a second and consider this example. Let's say I was combining groups of apples. So maybe I had 3 apples in one basket and 2 apples in another. If I added those together, I would have apples plus apples, which would give me more apples, right? It makes sense. Our units are the same, so our units match. Apples and apples give us more apples. Okay, but what about when they're different? For example, let's say I had apples in one basket, but oranges in another. Now I'm combining together the apples and the oranges, but I can't just make up a new word, apple orange. I have to talk about something they have in common when I group them together. So I might say something like apples plus oranges equals pieces of fruit, because I know that my two things that I'm starting with, my apples and my oranges, are two different kinds of units, but they're both pieces of fruit. So I can have something that they have in common to represent or to describe everything that I have. Okay, so what does this mean for fractions? Well, denominators again are the unit we're working with. So let's look at that apples plus apples example again. Let's imagine instead of the word being apples, that the word was fifths. So instead of apples plus apples equals apples, I have fifths plus fifths equals fifths. And that makes sense because just like apples and apples were the same unit, fifths and fifths are the same unit, which tells me my answer is going to be in fifths. Now, a lot of times fifth graders tell me this makes sense when they see it as a word, but they get thrown off when it's in fraction form. For example, if I have 2/5 plus 2/5 equals 4/5, even though my denominator is written as a number, it's still representing that word fifths. So these two units are exactly the same, which is why our final unit is a fifths piece. This is why when we have fractions with the same denominator, we can simply add the numerators because we're not really combining together the two fives. Those two fives are our units. We wouldn't put together apples plus apples equals apples apples. We just say that it's apples because it's talking about the unit. So let's take a look again at what happens if they're different. So again, we had apples plus oranges, and we knew we needed something they had in common, so that gave us pieces of fruit. So if I transfer that information or that thinking to a fraction question, now maybe I have fifths plus fourths, but I'm not quite sure yet what their something in common is. So I need to think, what do fifths and fourths have in common? This is why when you're adding and subtracting fractions with different denominators, you have to find a common denominator because you're really finding a common unit. So I can combine 2/5 and 2/4 by finding a common denominator of 5 and 4. When I list out my multiples, I'll find that that common denominator is 20ths pieces. Now, if I were to solve this question, I would find that it was 18/20ths, but the big idea here is that we're trying to understand that denominators really represent the unit we're working with. So I know that's a different way of thinking about denominators, but hopefully it makes a little more sense now why you need to find a common denominator when you add and subtract fractions. Because really, you're trying to find the common unit that you're using to solve the problem. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to put this idea into practice with all of you.